Good Friday morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Urban Ecology Center's Backyard Naturalist. My name is Tim, and I will be your host for today's episode that is also the final event of the 2024 Brew City Birding Festival. It was a fantastic week full of birds and birding and crafting and traveling and triviaing. I hope you were able to participate. I guess if you're watching this now, you are participating in the festival. This is the last hurrah, and I'm glad you're here. Um, this festival week gives me a little more permission to extend past the backyards of Milwaukee. Although Larry mentioned, this is the backyards and beyond. We've kind of broken up those barriers a while ago. There are no native extant parrot species here, but in many ways it's not a stretch because there are absolutely parrots around here in Milwaukee. They're just inside parrots for the most part. And that's something we tend to do often on this program is feature the creatures that are inside our houses. Maybe make the occasional visit to the backyard. So grab some crackers, grab your favorite pirate friend, kick back, relax, maybe groom your feathers or the feathers of someone you're watching with as we bring you episode 38 of season 5 of the Backyard Naturalist. Along came Polly, and yes, I admit this is one of the creepier front cover images, and I apologize for this image. We can get that out of your head now. This program is made possible with the generous support of viewers like you, with a nod to PBS and in this case Caillou. Whether you are here live or watching recorded, we are glad you are here. And we're approaching the final months of the 2023-24 season. We're gearing up for new adventures in season 6. There's still time to join our community of subscribers, either through a prorated annual subscription or a summer subscription. Thank you, thank you, thank you to our current cadre of subscribers. We are so happy that you like to take these learning journeys with us. If you'd like to learn more on becoming a subscriber, please visit our website, urbanecologycenter.org. As a subscriber, you are automatically registered each week. You just have to open your email, click the link when you're ready, and we do have monthly subscriber field trips that travel near and slightly less near to places known and slightly less known. So the May trip is happening tomorrow. We'll visit a probably fairly well-known local green space, which is the Rotary Centennial Arboretum, which includes Riverside Park. And I expect a great day to look for wildflowers. We explore the intersection of the natural and human history of the park. And if you're just so bummed that the Bruce City Birding Festival is over, we will also keep an eye and ear out for birds. Probably no parrots, but it's not impossible. And again, we've been keeping a connection, an eye out to the connections of our backyards with space. And for the last couple of weeks, we've been following the highly anticipated Boeing space mission, the Starliner mission, which will be a second option for US companies to transport people and cargo to the International Space Station along with SpaceX. This mission has been delayed a few times, often coinciding with Backyard Naturalist Talk Days. Um, the most recent launch date was moved from today until Tuesday, May 21st at 3:43 p.m. Central Time because a helium leak was discovered just before the last launch. So it's good they discovered it beforehand in the service module. And I'm definitely not going to make jokes about doors flying off of Boeing craft or anything like that. That sounds like a good reason to delay a flight. So fingers again crossed. Hopefully Boeing is successful in this mission. And we are still in a good period of viewing meteor showers. We're past the peak of the Eta Aquariids, but we still have a good solid another couple of weeks. If you were lucky enough recently, you also got a good show of the Northern Lights. I'm sorry that I missed that. But always a good reason, whether it's the Northern Lights or meteors, to find a dark spot and continue to look to the sky. Um, and we also look to the sky for birds as well as to the ground and to trees. Um, and a quick shout out to first of all, stuff you should know. It's one of my favorite podcasts. It's certainly supplied a lot of the stories for today's talk. And then I mentioned a couple times the Bird Joy podcast. It's absolutely my favorite new podcast. They've had 3 episodes so far. Another one they drop, I think, every Friday. Hosted by Dexter Patterson, who's here in Madison, head of the BIPOC Birding Club of Wisconsin, and then Jason Hall, who's head of the In Color Birding Club in Philadelphia. And I just like the name of this podcast is absolutely perfect because every time I've listened to that, I've been brought joy by the speakers, and they've kind of reinvigorated my joy in birding and the birding community. So I encourage you to give that a listen and subscribe and leave comments and all the other things that are good for podcasters. There was a time when Milwaukee had parrots, um, a particular species of parrot, the Carolina parakeet. We were on the northern edge of their range, but they were confirmed here. If we were to be living back then and doing the same kind of birding we are now, they probably wouldn't be as rare as a flamingo. We'd probably know where to find them a little bit better, and it would be a fun addition to the color of our birding landscape. Unfortunately, that's no longer the case. The parakeet went the way of the passenger pigeon and the dodo and the 1,500 other species of birds that are no longer with us because of the actions of our own species. We made some bad mistakes over the millennia, but because of our fascination with animals and birds, there are likely many, many parrots living in Milwaukee today, just not in the wild. They are in our houses as companions, as pets. In fact, birds in general are the fourth most popular pet in the US. Most popular, as it should be, are the dogs, followed by the cats, and then followed by fish, all of which we've featured on the Backyard Naturalist. We haven't really looked at fish as pets yet, but the aquarium trade, but we have talked about local fish. And then coming in at the fourth most popular pet are birds. And the vast majority of bird pets are parrots. And when I say parrot, that is a loose term because there are almost 400 species of parrots in the world. They're in the order Psittaciformes. And this is an actual parrot called a parrot, the African gray parrot, which is a type of parrot. But there are many types of other birds that are also considered parrots that have different names. So parakeets are parrots, as are lorikeets and cockatoos and cockatiels and macaws and lovebirds. So the parrot is the order. There are parrots within them. There's also all these birds that are considered parrots. Um, I try to show them here in the wild setting because it's easy to sometimes forget that the wild ancestry of parrots is still today. So a lot of pets we talk about, like, well, the dogs came from the wild dogs and the wolves, and the cats came from the wild cats. Except for some examples, mainly in the farming industry, like pigeons and chickens and that, the majority of pet birds, if you consider them pets, are are at least the ones in the pet trade currently have wild populations. So we're not, they haven't been domesticated and they're kind of separate from their wild populations. They are currently both domestic and wild, which is a really important thing to consider um, as we continue with these stories. Um, the order, as you can see, there's many, many different sizes and shapes and colors, lots of blues and greens and reds. And one of the coolest things about these colors is that a lot of the pigments that make up these bright colors are different from pigments found in other birds. And they have antibacterial properties in them. The dye is named after this order. So that probably keeps them healthier. It's maybe one of the reasons why parrots tend to be quite long-lived is they have that natural antibiotic property within the dyes of their feathers. Um, so they're quite different in how they color themselves. Um, but of course, the colors are probably a big contributor to why they're such a popular pet. So a lot of variation between species and as a group. However, they do share a few things in common. So um, I guess I'll start with that. Well, a couple things here. So first, you have that short, curved, and sometimes very powerful bill. So last week I was telling the story of the incredible force that is in an owl's talon. So an owl's talon can reach a force of 500 or two, maybe even 1,000 pounds per square inch. Incredibly strong talons. The bite force of the macaws, the bigger parrots, can reach twice that. They can reach 2,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. Now, it is, spread a little bit more than over the point of a talon, but they have very strong bills. Um, they've been known anecdotally to be able to snap a broomstick in half. So consider that when you're maybe thinking about petting a macaw. Super strong, super agile bills, which makes sense because one of the major parts of the parrot diet is seeds. Sometimes the seeds are pretty small, but sometimes they can be really big and tough. The upper and lower mandibles move independently of each other, and they're the only bird that has a strong muscular tongue that's similar to ours. So, they can take a Brazil nut and just crush it like it's nothing, like one of those meringue cookies or something. And in addition to being so powerful, then they can delicately get the fleshy nuts out of from the hard shell. So it's like they have a strong nutcracker and then one of those little picks all in one. They can be powerful and delicate in their eating. So they have very powerful bills, but then they also, as this parrot is showing, they use their feet not for many different things, including eating. So, characteristic of parrots that's shared by other birds like owls and woodpeckers is the pattern of toes, two toes pointing forward, two pointing backwards. That may not seem like a big deal, other than, this parrot doing the little high foot. Um, but if you think about how important our opposable thumb is, imagine having two opposable thumbs, one on each foot. And that's essentially what parrots have. And so one of the things that allows them to do is it becomes expert climbers. Um, a lot of goods are good at perching. A lot of birds are good at perching. Parrots are excellent at climbing with those. So it uses the bill in climbing, and then it also uses the 2 feet with the two opposable thumbs. So lots of opposability. The bill itself is opposable. So they don't have to rely on flitting from branch to branch like most birds and flying. They're very good, and you'll see them just at walking around on trees, climbing from branch to branch, climbing up the trunk. Something I really didn't think about. I mean, and you see them doing that, but you also then notice the adaptations that allow them to do that. Um, and then those opposable toes are also used in eating. So in addition to having that very dexterous mouth with the parts, it's like they have an extra hand to help them maneuver things around. So a really, really helpful adaptation, having those two opposable fingers on each hand. Um, for many parrots, it's nearly impossible to tell the difference between males and females without surgical materials or behaviors, but for other birds like the Solomon Island electors, they've they show extreme sexual dimorphism. In fact, for a long time, these two, male and female, were considered to be separate species until someone noticed that their behavior ran counter to that explanation. As a rule, parrots tend to be fairly large, but there are also some that are itty bitty. So this is the buff-faced pygmy parrot. They weigh less than a half an ounce. For perspective, an empty soda can is more than a half an ounce. So they weigh less than an empty soda can. They're just over 3 inches long. This picture obviously doesn't give you perspective because looking at this picture, it could be any size. So here is a human thumb that is involved with holding an adult pygmy parrot. So very, very, very tiny. Most parrots are bigger. The other end of the spectrum is the hyacinth macaw that has the wingspan about the size of my 8-year-old or the height of my 8-year-old. So it's about 4 feet long. The bird itself is almost 4 feet long from head to tail. And so these are the largest parrots. But even these hyacinth macaws, the largest parrots, are weigh less than 4 pounds. They're about 3.5 pounds, um, mainly because they have to fly. And so just because a bird is big doesn't mean they weigh a lot. In fact, most flying birds just weigh very little for reasons that make sense. And then for perspective, here's a macaw next to a smaller human. So you can see how pretty darn big they are. Um, And, with that crushing beak right next to a little human. But the heaviest parrot, so the heaviest parrot is one that doesn't fly. That probably makes sense. Like the heaviest birds in general tend to be the ones that don't fly. And so this is the kakapo of New Zealand. Just a super, super, super cool bird. Look it up if you haven't. Look at videos. Really, really fun bird. In New Zealand, it weighs, even though it's a big bird, but it's not, the size of a macaw, but it weighs twice as much as a macaw, about 7 pounds. So they're flightless, and like the kiwi, their feathers are kind of not like degenerating or becoming more useful in other areas. So the feathers, they can't fly, but they're still, for warmth. They're kind of taking on more of the role that fur takes in mammals. So when you see a kiwi, those feathers really look more like fur. Um, Even though they're flightless, they can move around quickly, they can bound around, they can climb very well, again with those three opposable appendages. And like a lot of other mammals that occupy the ground niche, they're nocturnal. They have a great sense of smell for a bird. Their eyes are much more forward pointing, much more binocular than a lot of other parrots as well. They do use their wings, just so for still use for balance. They can still flap them. They just can't fly. And unfortunately, they're one of the most critically endangered parrots in the world. There's only about 150 of them left in the wild. But on the positive side, there's a lot of attention being paid to them. They're in New Zealand, which seems like a good place for a bird that needs help. Um, and so hopefully their future is okay. Uh, One parrot species that wasn't okay was the Carolina parakeet that I mentioned earlier, that used to be in our backyard. So there was a day where from the spot that I'm looking, I could probably look out and see the Carolina parakeets. Um, that would have been really cool. Um, Incidentally, you may have heard of Martha, which is the very last passenger pigeon in the world, that died in a cage in the Cincinnati Zoo. Martha's counterpart is Incus, which was the very last known Carolina parakeet to live, as far as we know anyway. And she died in the very same cage in which Martha had just died 4 years earlier at the Cincinnati Zoo. So kind of a bummer end to both of their stories, but maybe a fitting end. Back to their diet. Parrots are your basic omnivores. They eat much more plant matter than animal matter, but for the most part, it's seeds and nuts. They love the fruits. So basically, your basic KT bird mix, with with additional things. They will nibble on insects. They'll hunt for insects. Um, so they will eat animals as well. They are really good at finding and eating food, because they hang out in large groups. And so often you'll see them like cedar waxwings. They'll just descend on a tree. And if you've ever had the chance to see parrots in the wild, this is a really interesting way to see them because when they're flying, they're noisy, they're raucous, they're making a lot of noise. You see them descend on a tree, and then it's just like somebody switches a button and they just disappear. And they're in the tree, and you look for them with binoculars. Sometimes they'll make a little noise every now and then, but sometimes they'll just go silent. So it's just as if that flock completely disappeared, because they're so well camouflaged. You wouldn't think they are because of the colors, but oftentimes they're in the shade. The colors don't stick out as often, and they can just completely disappear. Uh, but they eat a lot of different things. They adapt well to human food, which oftentimes, unfortunately, is a pattern you see with species in cities. And that often leads to conflict with humans, which usually ends badly for the animal. So, um, parrots in many parts of the world, they're adaptable. They learn that easy meals come in agricultural areas, so they become agricultural pests, particularly in places like Australia. That's a common problem you see, pests in agriculture. Um, but there's one parrot that kind of took that to an entirely new level. So this is the Kia. This is a parrot also from New Zealand, and also a fairly large one and very curious. Um, they're often, figuring out ways to get in trouble with the local populations of Homo sapiens. Um, just Google the stories. There's good ones out there, and the the stories of them getting in trouble aren't new to today. They go way back. So in the 1800s, the local Kia population started to get a taste for agriculture, but not in terms of agricultural crops. They got a taste for livestock. So Kia's got a taste for eating sheep, which, you know, brings a whole new picture to parrots, in my opinion, but also brings a whole new level of what these shepherds must have had to go through. You picture them shepherds like gathering and telling stories of protecting their flocks from like wolves and bears and the ones from New Zealand are yeah, we got to protect them from parrots. Um and so it was a big issue because parrots are smart. They found this food and they're big again. So it's a large parrot. And when you see pictures of them, I mean, they kind of look like hawks or eagles. So farmers and ranchers would find their sheep completely eviscerated by the local parrot population. This story could have taken a terrible turn. Thankfully, it doesn't. Again, maybe it's because New Zealanders, but uh, they figured out basically that they didn't have to go and shoot all the Kias. They learned that they could make a Kia repellent, like we have tick repellents. So they could apply this Kia repellent on the sheep bellies. Apparently super bitter, distasteful to the parrots, and that kept the parrots from attacking the sheep. And it appears to have worked. Uh, New Zealanders love their Kias, but you know, like so many parrots, their populations are also threatened, and their propensity to get into mischief can be a big problem. And so, we get signs about not feeding the bears and other things here. The conservation efforts there are to try to keep the Kias wild and not dependent on humans. Don't give them opportunities, which may be futile given their curiosity. I love the final point in the four simple rules. Close your car doors. Losing your belongings to Kias is your fault and not theirs. For you wordophiles, a group of parrots is a pandemonium, which is a very apt description. Parrots are very social, often congregate in large groups. They're noisy, squawky, cacophonous, um, and is the case with a lot of birds that gather in big numbers. One of the primary purposes is for communication. There's a lot of verbal communication going on in parrots, a lot of stories being told, and also being in large groups makes it easier to find food and then communicate where the food is. Um, it helps with group defense. So there's a lot of reasons why a lot of birds will congregate in big numbers. And sometimes you'll see them gathering at salt licks or clay formations. So for photographers, it's a great place to go and sit and wait. And they're supplementing their diet with minerals. And there's also the aspect of gathering at the office water cooler. There's a lot of communication happening at the salt lick or the clay lick. Um, One of the favorite parrot pets is the lovebird, probably because we love to see parrots in love, and they're representing probably some of our desires and most of parenthood. Generally, parrots are monogamous. Both mom and dad will raise their young together. They'll take turns brooding on eggs and nestlings. If a parrot pair is separated, they exhibit signs of sadness and depression. They'll stop eating, they'll stop taking care of themselves. And if they are reunited, whether they're pet or wild, they kind of go into a state of frenzied rebonding, and they'll spend extra time grooming each other and feeding each other, which are traits that we as humans probably recognize as something we want to aspire to, strong, um, or like to see monogamous relationships, whatever the relationship is with human, other species. And I think one of the reasons that we enjoy them as pets is not only because we get to witness that relationship, the strong bond that they have for each other, but that bonding can also be directed towards humans if it's not another parrot. So they're very social in the wild, those strong bonds. In the pet trade, that translates to strong imprinting and bonding with their humans. So when you talk to people that have had parrots, You hear the stories about how loving they are to the family pack. Um, but oftentimes, if a neighbor, a relative, or a friend, partner visit, they can be pretty nasty and aggressive towards the newcomer. They'll have their favorites, even within the family. Sometimes they might bond with one parent and one child, but not the other. Um, I probably would not recommend kissing your parrot, not only because of that strong beak, but uh, you know, diseases, parasites, things like that. Um, I've never had a pet parrot. If you are considering it or have one, there's so many things to consider, both close to home and at a global school scale. So from what I've been told, parrots are a lot of work. They're very messy. So that's something to consider. If you're good with having a lot of poop and feathers around, then maybe a parrot's right for you. I do not want to anger the parrot pet lobby out there. And we'll get back to parrots as pets later. Uh, but before we get too much into that kind of lovey-dovey Disney, Amanda shared a story with me that I will share with you in the email next week, that a recent article that looks at things like infanticide and adoption in parrots. So it's much more complex, and not as Disney as we probably think. But there's certainly those aspects that are very strong. In the wild, parrots may lay just a couple eggs, um, or up to 8, depending on the species, and oftentimes only one or two are going to survive. So they have a very low reproductive rate. They're slow to reproduce. There's a lot of parental investment. Some, again, things that we can probably um, you know equate with ourselves. Uh, the parents may stay with the young or vice versa for 3 or 4 years. And we've talked about this a little bit in past episodes, but population ecologists group animals in spectrum that includes R and K selection. And R selected species are ones like mice or grasshoppers that can reproduce very, very quickly. They can overpopulate very quickly, and then the overpopulation often leads to population crashes. So you get these boomer bust cycles. And then uh, the K selected species, which are like humans and whales and parrots, tend to have very low reproduction rates, partly because of the parental investment that's involved. And so for a K-selected species to rebound, it often is very slow. Bats are a really good example of a K-selected species having only one young per year. Um, so if an R-selected species population crashes, they'll be concerned, but they can usually rebound quickly. When it happens to K-selected species, there's a lot more concern because you can't rebound as quickly. And so sometimes you have to wait. You can put everything in place for that population to rebound in terms of legislation and habitat, but that might not be enough if the species can't repopulate as fast. So it tends to put those K-selected species in more danger of extinction. And so now we're going to get into the really, I don't know, fun part about parrots. So we as humans really like to study and rate and rank intelligence in animals. So, first of all, it requires a strict definition, but it's so complex that you can't put a strict definition in intelligence. And then, of course, we're coming at this intelligence question from a very human-centric mind. So we're framing it in our own context already. But we've created tests like the mirror tests. We've created memory and problem-solving tests and tool use. Um, and for the most part, you got parrots that pass all those tests with flying colors. So that certainly starting with tools, um, and this is they compare to humans a little bit in this. So, for example, we have a problem as humans that it's hard for us to scratch an itch. Some places, depending on your body and abilities, and so the middle of the back is a good one, that a lot of people have issues with. And so we create tools or other ways to help us scratch those itches. Parrots are, I would say, at least as good as humans at finding tools to scratch an itch, maybe even better. They're a little more agile, so they'll pick up a stick or a feather. That the cockatoo in the lower left has a piece of uncooked spaghetti that's using to dig in and scratch an itch. And the cockatoo on top, that's a big stick that it's using. That's not like a tiny one. That's a big one. So maybe that's a particularly annoying itch, but that requires some strength. And so this actually might be my favorite slide of the presentation. Um, but oh, and of course sometimes it's not. We are the tool. The humans are the tool that the parrots need to scratch and itch. So humans sometimes we will use tools to make music for courtship. Who can't resist a really good drum solo? And parrots do this too. So there's a cockatoo that we've got woodpeckers that use their bill to bang on wood to make noise to attract mates. And this cockatoo is created its own drum set, so it's using that nicely opposable hand to hold onto a stick, and it's using that stick to bang on the branch for courtship. So maybe one of my favorite examples of tool use is this cockatiel drum set. Then you have the greater Vasa parrot, which uh, it's there are levels to their tool use. So first they will find pebbles and they'll use those pebbles to grind up seashells into tiny parts. Then that's not it. They will eat the shells. Makes sense. Birds need calcium. But then the males do this, and the males don't need as much calcium as the females because they're not the ones laying eggs. So they will regurgitate the shells into a paste, a calcium-rich paste, and then like a wonderful companion, they will feed that paste to the female parrot that in which they're bonded. So it's both part of the courtship ritual and bond strengthening is eating, chewing, regurgitating, and feeding that calcium-rich mixture to their mate. But again, calcium is very important for the egg-laying partner to produce strong and viable eggs. So in some ways, I think the complexity of tool use in parrots is takes a different level than in at least a lot of other animals. I mean, you do hear a lot of cases, and it's really cool about animals using tools, but usually it's often a pretty straightforward, like, I need this food. So it can be complex in how they get it, but it's like, I'm doing this to get food. In parrots, there's more subtlety and complexity in that tool use, in my opinion. Parrots show examples of altruism and reciprocity. Altruism is an extremely difficult trait to uh, to document because there's so many levels, even in human altruism. There's so many levels about, yeah, well, they did this, but you know, is at the genetic level, how is that doing? There are examples that we consider to be true altruism. It's very hard also to find that in the animal world because oftentimes if you're helping another animal, that animal might be sharing some of your genes. So humans, vampire bats, parrots have examples of altruism that at least from what we understand at the genetic level doesn't help their own genes, which would make it more in that true altruism. So you have many, many, many experiments with African greys. Uh, Great reading. But in this case, humans taught the parrots that they would either get food or they taught them that instead of food, they would get a token in their cage. And if they brought that token to the hole and gave it to the researcher, then the researcher would exchange the token for food. So like a little, a vending machine, basically, a human-powered vending machine. So they'd either receive food or a token. When two birds were separated by a wall with a hole in the middle, two unrelated birds, and one bird received food and a token, the other bird received nothing. Very regularly, the parrot that had both things would give their token to the other parrot through a hole, and then that parrot could give um, the the token to exchange food, and then both parrots would eat. Um, Bits of altruism, but in this case, also it's reciprocity, right? So that's another thing that makes altruism a little bit hard is, you know, I'm doing this favor for you with the assumption that you will do that favor for me when I need it as well. So that what kind of muddies those waters a little bit. Mimicry on its own is not a sign of intelligence, but parrots do take mimicry to a very high degree. And of course, that's one of the most well-known characteristic of parrots. is their ability not only to mimic, but to mimic the human voice. One of the reasons that we love listening to parrots is that they have particularly the bigger parrots have lower frequency range that are very similar to our own. So they sound more human rather than very high pitched like a lot of birds. Um, so they get to that lower range. Uh, and then that tongue that I was talking about earlier, that large, fleshy, manipulatable tongue in combination with the independently moving mandibles allows them to form human words uh, and to do it well. So they don't have lips, but they have just about everything else that is really needed to form human words. So they're excellent at mimicking the human voice and excellent at mimicking words. Um, I can't share YouTube videos here for copyright reasons, but I will share one at the end, and I will share that link with you. And I do encourage you to explore that parrot hole if you can. There's so many videos of parrots talking, parrots swearing. Some parrots get kicked out of situations because they've learned swear words. So they're, in a cafe or even like a wildlife preserve or rescue preserve, and then their mouths are so dirty, they're swearing at everybody that comes, and so they have to get kicked out because the visitors are complaining. Um, if you type in parrots in the search engine in YouTube, parrot swearing is the third most popular category. Um, there are wonderful examples of parrots in modern technology interacting with artificial intelligence. So a parrot talking to Alexa, parrots ordering food for their owners. There's one video of a parrot that tried to order a fart from Alexa. I don't think Tori's here. We'll have to appreciate that later. Which now I also want to try. Um, and this does show a degree of intelligence because it's not just pure mimicry, it's not just pure repetition. They show a grasp of word context and syntax, order. So parrots actually have an extra layer in their brain that is solely dedicated to mimicry and then likely context. And so they use mimicry for a lot of reasons, but also probably to adapt to new situations. And this obviously isn't just for human amusements. Wild parrots often have regional dialects. So, one area might have one dialect, one area another, and just like humans. And if birds grow up on the periphery or the border of those two dialects, they kind of need to learn both of them, and they need to know when to use both contexts. So the birds pretty much become bilingual, and then contextually they will switch depending on who they're talking to, which is amazing. Um, One of the most popular parrots was Alex the gray parrot. Alex, again, there's so many stories, popular stories, scientific stories on Alex's intelligence. It's a little sad when you find out that Alex stands for Avian Language Experiment. It kind of takes a little bit of the magic out because then makes it sound more like an experiment, which, he was than a sentient being that's living. But Alex reached what researchers consider a similar level of intelligence as a 5-year-old human being. So it, we've talked about him in previous episodes, and you can go back and look at some of the amazing things. But he understood the concept of zero as a number. Um, that's one of the hallmarks of some of the great human civilizations around the world. Alex understood concepts like bigger and smaller, same and different, and so they was able to use those in new situations. So they presented Alex with a birthday cake, and he created the word for that because he hadn't been seen it before. He called it yummy bread. And then he also dabbled in the existential. So the mirror test is another intelligence test, and not only do parrots pass the mirror test, when Alex looked into a mirror, he would start to ask these kind of existential questions. What color when he saw himself? And there's another parrot called Puck, had a vocabulary of 1,700 words, and both Puck and Alex would often talk about themselves in the third person. And Puck is known for making a connection. Again, there's the intelligence, and then there's the adaptability that Christmas was coming. So it was a Western environment that he was living in. And then on Christmas Day, he expressed not only that it was Christmas Day, but that the people around him would be happy. So taking that level of self-awareness and awareness of others. Um, I am not going to make too much of a judgment on parrots as pets. I mentioned they're a lot of work. And it's not just because of the mess. parrots are a commitment. It's not like a hamster or even a dog or a cat. Parrots live a long time, can easily live 60 years. Cookie the cockatoo lived to be 83 years old. Cockapoos in the wild live to be 90. Thankfully, it's illegal to have them to be held in captivity, or at least personal pet captivity. So if you are getting a parrot or planning on getting a parrot and you're younger than 83 years old, or yeah, you do have to consider the long-term plan that that parrot may outlive you, even if you're just, a few years old. So put them in your wills. Um, uh, I guess if you're any age, because the human life expectancy is probably not 83. So any time that you get a parrot, you would have to consider that that parrot could outlive you. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't consider this and don't realize this. And um, to see parrots today in the wild, for the most part, you need to head to the tropics or the subtropics. Or you can head to some of more of the exotic places like Florida or Texas or California or even Connecticut. Or if you're really looking at it for an adventure, you can head down to Chicago. Because all around the world, people have released parrots that they no longer wanted. Either it was too much of a hassle, or they didn't realize how long they would live, and they just released them, or parrots escape. And then these intelligent animals that escape, these intelligent social animals, can be quite adaptive to new areas and then thrive. There was that documentary about the parrots of Telegraph Hill. There's the Pasadena parrots. These are the monk parakeets of Chicago. And so this is one of the downsides of the pet trade because these escaped pets can not only wreak havoc on humans, but also on the native species that are around them. And then there's the really dark side of the pet trade, that every parrot that you can buy as a pet has a natural native population somewhere if they're not extinct. And the profitability of getting these pets to you leads to a high reward for poaching and illegal importation. And these parrots are often transported in terrible, terrible conditions. Many of them don't make the journey. But when people are willing to pay $10,000 or more, you don't have to get them all to their destinations alive. You need a few of them. So particularly like the macaws, uh, there's there there it's a big issue. So it's definitely something to consider when you're you know looking at getting a parrot. Not just to your personal life, but the wild parrot populations around the world. The sobering statistics on parrots is that about a third of the species, about 150, are threatened at a high level, critically threatened. Another third are near threatened. And you can point to a lot of reasons for this. There's obviously habitat loss and development, but the impacts of the pet trade is another one. There's about 800,000 chicks per year that are taken from the wild to supply this exotic pet market legally, illegally. In 1992, the U.S. enacted legislation that thankfully had the impact of cutting poaching in half here, or around the world. But Europe and Japan today are still some of the biggest markets and are still directly and indirectly maintaining this illegal pet trade. Hopefully, things will continue to improve. Your pet might have been ripped from their companions. They might have been taken from their young or vice versa. And again, this isn't a judgment against parrots or parrot owners. It's just something for us to consider in these actions. So maybe working with rescues a little bit more, really doing the research, not only about what getting a parrot means to you, but like where that parrot came from. And humans have always had a fascination with them. If there's no hard evidence that the old-timey pirates always had parrots, but it makes sense. They would be great companions on long journeys. They're imprinted on you. They're easy to feed, relatively easy to take care of, bonding with you on a long, lonely journey. Alexander the Great was smitten by parrots that after invading India, brought them back to Greece, and that started to spread around the beginnings of the parrot trade in Europe. There is a parrot named after him, the Alexandrine parrot. So yeah, we've had a long, complex relationship with parrots, as is the case with many groups of wildlife and plants that we explore here. I'll end with my own personal moment of Zen. I've been extremely lucky in my life to have been able to travel around the world to support and better understand nature and my experiences. They brought me to a place called Noel Kemp Mercado National Park in Bolivia, 1997. I remember it was 1997 because the park guards surprised me by firing up their gas generator one night, bringing me to their one television they had that barely got reception, and allowed me to watch the first half of the Packers Patriots Super Bowl with Portuguese announcers. So very considerate on their part. But one day I was coming home from a really long day in the field. I was studying the black and tawny seed eater, knee deep in water in a flooded savanna. The storm had just passed through. I was soaking. The sun came out, was shining. And then I saw a group very similar to this picture. There was about six blue and yellow macaws flying, across the horizon, and their wing beats were perfectly in unison. So what I saw was a flock of macaws that was every half second transforming themselves from a yellow to blue to yellow to blue because they have blue on the upper side and yellow on the bottom. So it felt like a computer generated image, like it couldn't be real. Um, One of the most awe-inspiring, magical moments of my life. I'll never forget it. So that's Parrots. Thanks for listening to my stories. I hope the coming days and weeks and years brings you the magic of nature in our backyards, and I look forward to seeing you next week.